I had never thought a simple paint job could feel like trespassing into someone else's world, but then she walked in, and the air itself seemed to lean closer. She was standing by the ladder, brush poised midair, sunlight spilling across her hair like liquid gold. Graceful, deliberate, but there was a subtle vulnerability beneath the calm. The way she hesitated before dipping the brush into the paint, like she was holding herself together for reasons only she knew. I couldn't stop looking. "I think the corner needs another coat," I said, my voice quieter than intended, but she didn't turn immediately. Instead, she shifted slightly, and our shoulders brushed, a fleeting touch that lingered far longer in my mind than in reality. Her eyes finally found mine, and I swear the room shrank around us. They were a strange mix of amusement and caution, scanning me like she was both measuring and forgiving some silent trespass I hadn't known I committed. I felt warm where her glance landed, an ache that wasn't quite longing. Not yet, but close. "Careful," she said, her voice low, almost teasing, though not with mockery. Her words felt like a brush against skin, subtle but deliberate. "You'll spill it." "I won't," I murmured, more to convince myself than her. I watched as she leaned forward to smooth a corner with her brush, the light catching her profile just so, the line of her neck, the slight arch of her back. She moved with confidence, but each motion seemed to carry a quiet hesitation, as if the space between us vibrated with something we both refused to name. I tried not to notice the warmth of her hand as it briefly brushed mine when she shifted past me to reach for a can of paint. My fingers tingled long after, caught somewhere between memory and desire. The scent of fresh paint mingled with her perfume, subtle, floral, grounding, and I found myself taking small, careful breaths so I wouldn't give away how completely I was caught. She turned then, closer than before, and our eyes locked. No words, just a beat of silence. I could feel her awareness of me, a quiet acknowledgement that we were sharing a private orbit inside this sunlit room. There was an odd sort of intimacy in it, a slow, invisible pull that neither of us seemed willing to name. Her sister's voice floated in from the doorway, breaking the bubble, yet the words she spoke only heightened the tension. "Close the door, I don't want them to see." Her eyes flicked to the door, then back to mine, a subtle, unspoken question hidden in that look. My pulse picked up, caught somewhere between anticipation and fear, the world narrowing to the two of us, the room, and the quiet promise lingering in her gaze. I stepped closer without thinking, not wanting to miss a fraction of the moment, and that's when the door creaked, a sound sharp enough to slice through the silence, and yet somehow softer than the pounding in my chest. She inhaled, barely audible, her brush frozen mid-stroke, and for a heartbeat, the whole room seemed suspended, and then the world intruded again. The afternoon sun had softened, painting the room in a mellow amber glow, and every shadow seemed to deepen the space between us, yet pull us closer at the same time. I caught myself watching her more than the walls I was supposed to be painting. She had that way of moving through a room, confident, deliberate, almost untouchable, and yet there was a softness around her edges, like someone who had learned to carry life's weight without letting it crush her entirely. I remembered her mentioning, almost offhand, that she'd spent years immersed in work, raising her sister, navigating the quiet disappointments life throws at you when you're expected to be strong. There was a trace of loneliness in her laughter, the kind that slips out only when she thinks no one's paying attention. And maybe that's why I felt myself drawn in, trying to bridge the distance, though I knew it was risky. We both knew the world would raise its eyebrows if it noticed the way we lingered near each other, the 20-something quietly enamored, the woman a decade older, confident, but carrying memories she didn't volunteer. It wasn't just the age gap, it was the unspoken rules about boundaries, propriety, and the consequences of wanting something forbidden. And yet, every time our hands brushed, the risk became sweeter, sharper, unavoidable. "Careful with that corner," she said again, not as a warning, but almost like an invitation. Her shoulder brushed mine as she leaned forward, a touch that lingered long enough to make my chest tighten. I wanted to pull back, to remind myself of the caution I should practice, but my body betrayed me, leaning just slightly closer. Her eyes caught mine mid-motion, and for a moment, I saw vulnerability behind her composed exterior, a flicker of doubt, of hesitation. It made her human, approachable in a way that drew me in despite my better judgment. She inhaled softly, and her breath brushed against my ear as she adjusted her position. I had to swallow hard to hide the sudden awareness of how close we were. I found myself noticing every detail, the way her hair fell against her neck, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the smell of paint, the softness of her hand as it rested near mine. She seemed to notice too, lingering just long enough, then pulling away with a small, almost imperceptible retreat that only heightened the tension. "Do you need a hand?" I asked, almost unnecessary, just to keep my voice steady. Her gaze softened, and she tilted her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Maybe," she admitted, and when her fingers brushed mine while reaching for the same brush, the electricity in the contact made me catch my breath. Not a word was exchanged, but something unspoken passed between us, a quiet acknowledgement of the shared tension that neither dared to name. For a few moments, we just stood there, the room warm, sunlight stretching across the floor, two bodies caught in a delicate orbit, edges almost touching. And in that stillness, something deepened, a silent bond forged not by words, but by the subtle, intimate knowledge that we were both aware of the dangerous gravity pulling us closer. I thought I could focus on the ceiling trim, counting each careful stroke, but then she appeared beside me again, closer than I remembered. Her shoulder brushed mine, not by accident, and I felt a shiver run down my spine, the kind that had nothing to do with the cold draft sneaking through the half-open window. "I think that corner could use a second pass," she murmured, almost a whisper, and I realized how close she was, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her body. Her hair brushed my cheek as she leaned slightly forward, and I had to swallow hard, clenching my jaw to steady the sudden thrum in my chest. Then, just as I was about to respond, my phone buzzed. A message. I glanced down, momentarily breaking the spell, but in that heartbeat, she tilted her head, watching me with those knowing eyes, lips parted as if she were about to say something she didn't. My fingers itched to reach for her hand, but I froze, the sound of the notification pulling me back to reality. We lingered in that small, charged space, neither moving first. Every brush of her sleeve against my arm felt deliberate, every pause between our words heavy with unspoken meaning. The distance between us was shrinking, inch by inch, yet we both held back, bound by hesitation and the silent rules we weren't supposed to break. "I didn't realize the light hit it like this," I said, my voice low, my eyes refusing to leave hers. Her presence was magnetic, overwhelming in its subtlety, and for a moment, I imagined leaning closer, letting the tension break into something undeniable. She leaned in too, almost mirroring me, and our breaths mingled, warm and quiet, the room shrinking to just the two of us. A soft creak from the hallway made us both flinch, and we pulled back just enough to maintain appearances, though the pull between us remained taut, like a string stretched to its limit. Guilt, hesitation, fear of what anyone would think, all of it knotted in my stomach, but it didn't weaken the magnetic tug I felt. Our glances met in a rapid rhythm, eyes flicking away and back again, each look loaded with the questions we dared not ask aloud. My fingers brushed against hers, once, twice, lingering long enough to make my pulse spike. She didn't pull away, yet she didn't close the gap, either. It was a dance of restraint, each of us testing the boundaries of propriety while drawn to something dangerous and intoxicating. I could feel her presence pressing against me, the heat from her arm, the subtle brush of her hair across my neck, and despite every rational thought screaming for caution, my body betrayed me, inching closer. She mirrored it perfectly, both resisting and inviting, until finally we were pulled so close that even the smallest movement could have sent us over the line. And yet we paused there, suspended in the space between temptation and reason, hearts pounding, breaths mingling, caught in a moment that felt like it could ignite or shatter everything. The paintbrush trembled slightly in my hand, though I convinced myself it was the brush, not me. But the room had changed. The air had thickened with something unspoken, and every glance she gave me carried weight, a quiet pull that made it impossible to look away. She stepped closer, her shoulder brushing mine as if by accident, but my body knew better. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the subtle rise and fall of her chest so close to mine that I could almost taste it in the air. My fingers twitched, aching to reach for her, yet frozen in the uncertainty of propriety and desire. I can't stop thinking about it, I said, my voice low, almost a whisper, but enough for her to hear. I didn't finish the sentence, and I didn't need to. The meaning lingered between us, heavier than any paint on the walls. Her hand lifted, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, and I swear the world stopped for a heartbeat. The soft brush of her fingertips against my cheek, the warmth of her arm near mine, the faint scent of her perfume, every sense screamed that she was closer than I had ever dared imagine. I shouldn't, she murmured, her voice trembling just slightly. We shouldn't. She stepped toward me, then stopped, leaving only inches between us. Her breath brushed my ear as she spoke, and my pulse hammered so loudly I feared it would betray everything. For a moment, the hesitation vanished, replaced by raw intensity. My hand moved almost instinctively, brushing along her arm, tracing the line of her shoulder, feeling her shiver in response. I wanted to close the gap, to let restraint fall away entirely, yet fear and longing warred inside me. Her eyes locked on mine, a question and a dare intertwined in their depths. "Do you want this?" she asked, her lips so close I could feel the warmth radiating off them. I swallowed hard, words failing me entirely. Desire and guilt collided, leaving me breathless, every rational thought drowned in the tide of emotion. I could feel the heat of her body leaning toward me, the tiny tremor in her hand as she reached again, not for the brush, but for me. And then the world threatened to intervene. The door creaked just slightly, a sound that made us both freeze mid-motion. Our faces were inches apart, heartbeats synchronized, breaths mingling. My lips hovered near hers, and for a moment, the room held its breath with us, caught between inevitability and hesitation. "I can't resist anymore," she whispered, her voice trembling as she leaned just a fraction closer, closing the final millimeter between want and action. And that's when the brush slipped from my hand, clattering against the floor, and I flinched, not from the noise, but from the sudden weight of her words. She had leaned back, eyes wide, a flush creeping up her neck, and for the first time, I saw something unguarded, raw, almost dangerous in its honesty. I overheard your call last night," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Her hand hovered near mine, unsure whether to retreat or reach, trembling slightly. "You weren't just talking about paint." My heart stuttered. The words weren't accusatory, but they cut through the careful veneer of control I'd been clinging to. I swallowed hard, trying to steady the storm inside me, feeling her presence close, yet impossibly distant. She had crossed a line, unintentionally, and now the room seemed smaller, the air heavier, as if every particle knew the truth we hadn't dared voice. Her fingers brushed mine as she adjusted her position, and the contact sparked electricity through me that I could not hide. I wanted to pull her closer, to erase the tension with a touch, a kiss, anything. Yet the fear of consequence held me back. The knowledge that she had heard, that she now knew more than she should, made every inch of our proximity charged with danger. I didn't mean for you to hear," I murmured, voice low, caught between apology and confession. Her eyes softened, but only just, the tension in her jaw hinting at her own struggle. She was balancing desire and caution in a way that mirrored my own, and it made the air between us taut, vibrating with a dangerous energy neither of us could ignore. We circled the truth silently. Every glance was a question, every inhale a challenge. Her shoulder brushed mine as she shifted, too close to be innocent, yet distant enough to remind me of the line we hadn't crossed. I felt the pull of her body, the warmth, the subtle tremor in her hand, as if the revelation had unleashed something she had buried for years. I can't stop thinking about you either, she admitted. Finally, voice barely audible, lips parting as if the words cost her something precious. My pulse jumped, and I felt the heat rise in my chest, the gravity between us pulling stronger, faster, dangerous. Her gaze held mine, steady now, with something that demanded acknowledgement. It was no longer a whisper, a hesitation, or an almost touch. It was a declaration in silence, the kind that shatters caution without saying a word. And in that moment, I knew there was no turning back. Every step, every brush of skin, every heartbeat that collided in the shared air of the room was a choice. We could retreat, or we could fall, deliberately, recklessly, into what had been waiting for us all along. She took a step closer. I didn't move away. Her fingers brushed my arm again, lingering longer than before, and the room held its breath with us. I think we have to decide, she said, voice trembling with something that wasn't just fear. Desire, guilt, longing, all tangled together in one fragile, impossible thread. And with that, the inevitability began. The room felt smaller, as if the walls themselves leaned in to witness what was happening between us. Every sound, the faint drip of paint, the hum of sunlight through the blinds, the uneven rhythm of our breaths, seemed magnified. I could feel her warmth through the thin fabric of our shirts, the brush of her hair against my cheek, the subtle tremor of her hands when she reached toward me. I can't, she whispered, but there was no real conviction in the words. Her eyes searched mine, wide, raw, caught between caution and surrender. I shook my head slightly, stepping closer until the gap between us vanished. Inches. That was all that separated restraint from everything we'd been wanting. I don't want you to, I said softly, letting my voice drop into a quiet murmur, brushing just close enough that my words might be felt on her skin as much as heard in her ears. Her fingers lingered near mine, and finally, she allowed a hand to rest lightly on my chest. My heart hitched at the weight of her touch, hesitant, seeking, unspoken. I placed my hand over hers, holding it there, and for a moment, the world disappeared. Do you really want this? She asked, a tremor in her voice that betrayed everything she wasn't saying. I've wanted it from the moment I saw you, I admitted, voice low, and in response, her shoulders relaxed, ever so slightly, as though my confession had lifted some hidden burden. Our faces drew closer, breaths mingling in the quiet, charged air, and the space between us was no longer a distance but a tether, binding us to a choice we couldn't undo. She leaned in, the faint brush of her lips against mine impossible to ignore. My hand slid gently along her arm, grounding us both, steadying the sudden rush of emotion, of desire, of fear melted into want. The tension that had coiled between us for days, for years, in some ways, began to unravel in the soft gravity of the moment. And then she paused, just a fraction, eyes closing, a silent question hanging in the air. I held her gaze for a heartbeat, feeling the full weight of everything unspoken, past regrets, hesitation, longing, and the quiet knowledge that we could no longer hide what was true. I don't care what anyone thinks, she whispered, finally letting herself lean fully into me, pressing just slightly, enough to feel the promise of closeness we'd both resisted. I responded instinctively, matching her movement, letting restraint fall away. For the first time, there was no pretense, no hesitation, only the raw, messy, human connection of two people finally admitting what they had carried silently for so long. Our hands, our breaths, our very presence spoke volumes more than words ever could. We stayed like that, inches apart, the room heavy with paint and sunlight and the echo of something irreversible. And in that quiet, suspended moment, we understood each other fully, not just desire, but the complexity, the risk, the longing, and the messy, beautiful humanity that made it real. No further words were needed. The choice had been made, and nothing would ever be the same again. The afternoon light had softened to a gentle gold, painting the room in warmth that felt almost like a sigh. The paintbrushes lay forgotten in the corner, their work done, but the energy between us hadn't faded. It had shifted, settled, finally real. We sat side by side on the floor, leaning against the wall, legs nearly touching, fingers brushing, and then intertwining naturally. There was no need for words. Every glance, every subtle squeeze of our hands, spoke more than anything we could say. The tension that had haunted us all day, all week, all years of quiet longing, had finally melted into something tender, human, and wholly ours. "I can't believe she began, voice soft, trailing off, and I felt her leaning just slightly into me. Her hair brushed my shoulder, and the simple warmth of her presence made my chest ache with contentment. I lifted my hand to her cheek, brushing back a loose strand of hair, and she closed her eyes, leaning into the gesture. The air between us was heavy with sunlight, faint traces of paint, and the quiet intimacy of two people who had crossed an invisible line and chosen to stay together on the other side. "You're really here," I said, voice low, not needing to explain further. She gave a small laugh, breathy and sincere, and nudged her forehead against mine. "Yes," she whispered, "and I don't want to go anywhere." We stayed like that for a long moment, suspended in simple human closeness, the kind that doesn't need drama or perfection, only presence. Her fingers held mine tightly, and I could feel the rhythm of her heart against my chest. Age, past fears, social expectations, none of it mattered anymore. Only this, two people finally allowing themselves to be seen, fully, without pretense. Eventually, we sat back just enough to look at each other properly. Smiles curved softly across our faces, not forced, not hurried. Just the quiet recognition of something beautiful, rare, and undeniable. The world outside could wait. For now, there was only this room, the fading sunlight, and the warmth of a connection that neither of us would ever forget. We leaned together one last time, foreheads resting against each other, breathing synchronized, a shared smile in the quiet aftermath of everything we dared to feel. The room was still, but alive with a sense of completion, possibility, and the kind of intimacy that comes from truly seeing someone and letting yourself be seen. And as we sat there, fingers entwined, I realized that endings don't always need words. Sometimes a hand held, a shoulder leaned against, and a quiet smile says everything. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next? 6.